How's it going, everybody? Today is June 19th, and this is day 15 of 37 conversations. Wanted to talk to you today briefly about Juneteenth. This is a beautiful day to Black people and people of color, but predominantly in the African American community. Juneteenth is very historical. It's very monumental. It's filled with celebration and rejoicing and happiness. I wanted to touch on Juneteenth, just primarily just to talk about the significance of the day, but then also, because I was seeing posts online, different corporations, even my University of Florida had commemorated Juneteenth through various posts on UF's webpage, UF's on Instagram, as well as on like the Gator football Instagram and so on and so forth. And there were a lot of people saying, like, I've never even heard of Juneteenth. This is the first I've ever heard of it. Excuse me. I had a buddy that actually messaged me today, and he was working from home, and he sent me this, and he was telling me that his boss was like, "Hey, I just learned about something today called Juneteenth." So, it was that's sad. But then it was also comical. He was sending it to me in that sense. But then also it's a moment to be able to be happy about it as well, because people are learning about history that's very significant and meaningful to Black Americans and Black people in general. I mean, the United States, we're leaders in many respects, right? And the freedoms that we provide to our citizens are seen as examples of what democracy should look like around the world. So so Black people in general celebrate this day. A lot of people I've found just in conversation, as well as with some of the posts that I've seen, don't know about Juneteenth, don't know what it's about. I mean, it's really simple. I mean, this day is referred to as Emancipation Day, Liberation Day, Jubilee Day, Independence Day, even. In 1862, of course, we all know the Emancipation Proclamation was, given by the President of the United States at that time, who was Abraham Lincoln. But of course, Black people, that were enslaved in the United States at that time, I think there were between 3 and 4 million people that were in bondage at that time. They weren't all freed automatically. I mean, the Civil War was still going on in 1862. Of course, Civil War was from 1861 to 1865. So the Civil War was going on. And, even though a big part of the Civil War had to do with a lot of the economic policies that, the Southern states didn't want to abide by as it relates to the Northern states and other just ways of life that the Confederacy wanted to maintain. One of the main, reasons for the Civil War, and one of the main aspects of the Civil War, was slavery. And so even though in the midst of the Civil War, when Abraham Lincoln, gave their Emancipation Proclamation, which effectively freed the slaves, they were not freed, all of them, until June 19th of 1865, after, the Civil War had ended, the Confederacy had been defeated, and some Union troops made it to Texas, which is basically on the fringe, on the edge of what was considered to be the Confederacy, and essentially informed those slaves, and they enforced, if you will, the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing all those slaves that were in bondage at that time. I think there was about 300,000 or something. So the reality is, even though going back to the Emancipation Proclamation, even though that had been orated and had been given and proclaimed by the president in a manner which I would probably consider to be somewhat of like an executive order, the slaves didn't know they were free until people told them. So, even from that point in 1862 until over 2 years later in 1865, people were still, enslaved. They were still in bondage. They didn't, slaves weren't allowed to read. They weren't allowed to be educated. So, that was also part of some of the suppression that took place, obviously, of Black people in this country at that point in time. So, they didn't know they were freed until those Union troops came to Galveston, Texas, and told them that they were free and enforced the Emancipation Proclamation. And that's on June 19th of 1865. And Juneteenth is a combination of June and 19th. So that's where that term Juneteenth comes from. And you'll hear many times in the Black community that people don't celebrate the 4th of July in the same manner that our white counterparts do, because the reality situation is my ancestors on this continent, they weren't free, and they weren't freed, if you will, in 1776. They weren't freed until 1865. So that's why you'll see a lot of depictions, T-shirts, memes, gifs, whatever, where it's like, no, not July 4th, June 19th. That's why it's more significant to the Black community. The point that I'm making now that I just thought about, that I wanted to mention real quick, is the fact that, because of our history, because of our nation's history, certain holidays are not celebrated in the same manner as they are with our white counterparts. So do I celebrate Independence Day? Of course I do. I mean, I'm an American. I understand the significance of, the independence that this nation gained at that time from rule over Great Britain and such. But in the same context, through the lens of my ancestors and through the lens of my culture, it's not the exact same thing, because we were still in bondage and we were still enslaved at that point in time. We weren't free. The nation was free, but there was still a part of society that was still in bondage. And then even further than that, I mean, you can even say the exact same thing about Thanksgiving. I mean, I'm American, and I certainly, we've always, celebrated Thanksgiving in the respect of being thankful for family, being thankful, counting your blessings, and being thankful for what you have, life and, health and, things of that nature. But, when the Pilgrims had, that meal with, the native people of, the Native Americans, which they were ultimately, classified as, if you will. But when they had that meal with the natives, of that area, and the Pilgrims, had that meal and such, we don't celebrate that in that same exact manner. I mean, again, that's not our heritage. That's a cultural experience. That's a cultural celebration and holiday, if you will, that does not, it doesn't relate to us in that manner, if you will, because even going back to that time, simply put, Black people and even the natives after that were not seen as even being human. They weren't seen as being on par with, their white counterparts in, society, if that's the word that we should use, or the lands that were of that time. So, I mean, that's something I wanted to kind of touch on, because some people take a lot of they have a lot of animosity, and they have a lot of confusion, frustration, disgust, if you will, with the fact that there's a population of people who don't celebrate Independence Day in the same manner that they do, or they don't celebrate Thanksgiving in the same manner that they do. And it requires some truly understanding of history, which, again, going back to one of my points earlier that I made earlier in this conversation, people aren't learning about those things. I've said that in it's come up in different conversations that we've had. Going back to my very first conversation of education, we're not learning about this. So it's really unfortunate. It's really unfortunate that there are so many people who are like, "What is Juneteenth? How is Juneteenth? What's the significance of that?" Like, I've never even heard of Juneteenth. And honestly, I mean, to be completely honest, I mean, keeping it real, there are many Black people who don't celebrate Juneteenth because even they have not been taught that in that manner, whether it's through their people who came before them, through their generations and such, and they're definitely not learning about it in school. And not to speak in absolutes, I mean, I'm sure there are some teachers out there that are teaching their students about Black history, which is also American history, and making sure that they understand the significance of holidays such as Juneteenth. And in Texas, afterwards, sometime in the 80s, sometime when I was growing up, it was identified as a holiday. And I think something like there are states that I don't know off the top of my head, but there are states who recognize Juneteenth as being a holiday. One thing I do want to touch on is in this moment that we're in right now, with corporations, organizations, individuals reflecting on their own morals and values, reflecting on their own role in this whole racism conversation whether they're outspoken or not outspoken, or they say certain things, or they behave in certain ways. We've seen that many corporations in this last couple of weeks, and especially going even more so in the last week or two, have been, giving their employees paid time off for Juneteenth. They're considering it a holiday moving forward, which is awesome. That's great. That's really cool. I think that identifies, it communicates to the employees that are, working at that, particular organization or business or corporation or whatever, that they have a commitment to inclusion. And then also it communicates outwardly, externally, that, that corporation also has a commitment to inclusion, and that they're standing for something, and that something's, important to them. But going back to the conversation I had last night, in this movement, as it relates to Black Lives Matter, you're going to hear many activists, you're going to hear many people, many community organizers, people such as myself, that are going to, say that's all nice and good. That's awesome that you're acknowledging, Juneteenth as a holiday, but no one asked for that. What we asked for is to be treated civilly. What we're asking for is to be treated as equals, and then also create equity because of the systemic racism that has endured over many years, generations in this country, to be able to make up for the deficits that exist in our communities of color. So not to say that acknowledging something like Juneteenth as a paid holiday isn't the first step. It very well may be. But there's a lot more, that needs to be done. I mean, there are businesses, my last two places I've worked, where I work right now, where I worked before that, they don't even acknowledge, Martin Luther King's birthday as a holiday, even though it's a federal holiday. And that's not I'm not speaking ill of those organizations. There are many companies and organizations that don't acknowledge that. I mean, you have, I've been in various school systems where some places you got Columbus Day off, some places you didn't get Columbus Day off, some places you got Veterans Day off, some places you didn't get Veterans Day off. So, I totally understand employers are going to pick their holidays that they want, to be able to, have their employees observe, and so on and so forth. But the point that I'm making to you is this: like, Martin Luther King's birthday has been a federal holiday also since the 80s or so, after some pushback from some legislators and such, but that got acknowledged as a federal holiday. And you're going to have people who are, partaking in that day off. You're going to have people who are, barbecuing and going to the beach and having a 3-day weekend, maybe doing a staycation or vacation or whatever, but they're not upholding the ideals of Martin Luther King Jr. They may have prejudice, they may have racism in their heart, whatever the case. So simply because people are being given this day off, and we're seeing it, proliferate, and we're seeing it more and more right now in these last couple of weeks and such. That's great. That's a great recognition that, those businesses are acknowledging the holiday in that manner. But there's a lot more to it. And again, if you're joining now, I'm not trying to speak ill of those companies, okay? Because again, the first step, in a mile or whatever the case may be, is taking that first step. So, and this is a complex circumstance. It's a complex, discussion and moment that we're in. So I don't want to speak ill of, corporations that made that decision per se, but I just hope that doesn't ring hollow. You know what I mean? I just hope that, these businesses that are taking that stance to ensure that their employees, especially their employees of color, are recognizing that as leaders and as business, leaders and so on, that listen, we understand that this day is important to our American history. This day is important to many people in this country. So we're going to acknowledge it as a holiday. Isn't where they stop, isn't where they end. Because, again, going back to our conversation last night, there's a lot more systemic issues that we have in our country, way beyond, giving someone a holiday off. I mean, we need to address, a multitude of things, which I've talked about throughout all these conversations. So, I mean, today's a great day. I mean, I hope that, hopefully this isn't the first explanation of Juneteenth that you've heard. But if it is, I encourage you to look it up, Google it, look at podcasts, and listen to a podcast, or, pick up a book, or, speak to a person of color, a Black person that about what this, the significance of this, day is to them. Also understanding that some Black people aren't familiar with, they don't have a deep knowledge or understanding of Juneteenth, because it may not have been impressed upon them or taught to them as well. So, it'd be great, for you to go and have that conversation with someone, and identify just how this is also needs to be, understood to be a significant day in American history, not just Black history, American history. Because, Black people, we have birthright citizenship, right? So even though in this country, Africans were robbed from, Africa and brought here as slaves, once, they started to have children. I mean, those children were Americans from the day they were born, obviously. So that's American history, right? And certainly, everyone that was, enslaved in 1865 had been born here, because slavery began in 1619. So certainly no one lived that long. So my point that I'm making is, hopefully this is just something that's going to be just infused into our social consciousness and, understood to be a part of our, significant aspect of our history. And also, I lost my train of thought on that one. I'm sorry. You're part of our social consciousness, but then also understand that this is an opportunity for you to continue to educate yourself and learn, and hopefully you can share that knowledge with somebody else. That'd be really, really cool. That'd be so awesome. I mean, as I said earlier, it's somewhat disappointing and frustrating how many people aren't familiar with the significance of this day, but they know about it now, right? And you got to start somewhere. And the type of person I am, I'm a glass half full person. I'm not going to, be upset or frustrated because it's like, well, you should have learned this. Well, there's truth to that, but I think people know about it now. And if someone doesn't understand, the significance on how Black Americans see this as an Independence Day for themselves, relative to the 4th of July, hopefully you can have that conversation. And that conversation is very simple. I mean, Black people were still enslaved, July 4th, 1776. So, just wanted to have that brief conversation tonight. Today was a great day for me. Had a long work day, went and participated in a Juneteenth gathering, which was part protest, part prayer, part music. The mayor of Tampa came out. The police chief of the Tampa Police Department, he came out. He was participating in it as well. It was just awesome. I'm cooking some food right now. Like, it's just going to be just a great day to just relax and just hang out, and then a good start to the weekend. So I do want to give a shout out, though. I'm wearing my Unapologetically Black shirt today, which is also in my profile picture. I got to give a shout out to my fraternity brother, Jamal Wilberg. Please check out his Facebook, Black Owned Business. His Facebook is my-t-sharp. So my T Sharp, my-t-sharp. On Facebook, please go over there and give him a like. He makes custom shirts. They're not all, just, Afrocentric or anything like that, but he makes all types of shirts. So, different designs. If you have a concept that you have, he can make a, template and all that kind of stuff. And they're good quality shirts. They look good. They hold up in the wash and all that stuff. So, go give my frat brother Jamal Wilberg a like on Facebook. My T Sharp is his Facebook. So hope you all have good question. It's T with just the letter T, not T-E-E. So it's the letter T. So it's my-letter-T-sharp. That's his Facebook page. So tomorrow I'm going to have a conversation. I've decided to do it because when I mentioned it the other night, a few people brought it up. So tomorrow I'm going to have a conversation about, is silence complicity? So, I hope that there's some dialogue that we can maybe have. Maybe people can provide, I haven't really relied on the comments too much in the chat during the lives. So I would love for people to, in the chat tomorrow or, moving forward, provide their thoughts or questions that they want me to respond to or react to during the live broadcasts and such. But tomorrow we're going to discuss, is silence complicity? And I have a feeling that, that might be kind of thought-provoking and provide opportunity again for you to go and have those conversations with other people and, maybe be a call to action. So hope you have a good night. Happy Juneteenth. Independence Day, Emancipation Day, Jubilee Day, Freedom Day. Hope you heard about it already before before, what is this, like 7:50 this evening on Juneteenth. But if you haven't, go check it out. Go do some research, go look some things up and educate yourself a little bit. Have a good Friday evening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.